When the restaurant doors opened that late afternoon, no one looked twice at the small, elderly black woman who stepped inside. But they should have, because the quiet woman in blue wasn't there just for dinner. She was about to test the soul of the place, and every person in that room was about to learn who she really was. Comment 1 if you feel something heavy is about to unfold, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Sinclair's place was glowing, the kind of southern fine dining restaurant where polished mahogany tables caught the golden light of sunset through tall windows, and piano keys whispered nostalgia from a quiet corner. It was the pride of Charleston, a space where old money and new ambition dined side by side. Waiters glided like ghosts in white shirts and black vests, glasses sparkled like crystal prayers, and everything smelled faintly of rosemary and warm bread. People came here to celebrate promotions, to propose marriages, to sign real estate deals. But no one came to be disturbed, especially not by someone who looked like she'd wandered in from another world. When Naomi Sinclair walked in, the mood didn't change, but it shifted, subtly, like a string pulled too tight beneath a cello's breath. She paused just beyond the threshold, then moved forward like she owned the air itself. Naomi wore her age the way some women wear pearls, with quiet dignity. Her navy blue coat, lined with delicate embroidery near the cuffs, hung neatly around her slender frame. Her hair, silver and coiled in soft braids, was tied back tight. She moved slowly, but with a posture too upright to be mistaken for weakness. She held a small black handbag under her arm and approached the hostess with a voice that didn't ask permission. "Good evening," she said. "Do you have a reservation?" the young hostess asked, her smile polite but thin. "Yes, under the name Naomi Sinclair." There was a pause. The hostess checked her list, twice, then finally nodded. "Right this way." But instead of leading her toward the center of the room where the windows opened wide and the piano's melody echoed softly, she guided Naomi to a table near the kitchen doors, the one nobody ever requested, the one everyone hoped was reserved for someone else. Naomi sat without complaint. She folded her hands on the table and took in the menu slowly. Her reading glasses were small and rimless, the kind her son had once bought her for Christmas, but she didn't need them to see what was happening. The waiter for her section walked past 3 times, a young man, tall, pale, with sandy hair and a crisp uniform. His name tag read, Trent. Each time he passed, his eyes flicked to her and then away again, like she were background noise, like she didn't quite belong. Tables around her, where younger, louder patrons sat, were greeted with cheerful tones and water glasses filled to the brim. When Trent finally stopped at her table, he didn't smile. "Sorry for the wait," he said. "We're really busy right now. I'll be back to take your order." And then he walked away before she could even respond. Naomi glanced down at her empty water glass. The condensation from the glass had already faded. She reached for it anyway, out of habit, but nothing came. A few feet away, Trent poured a second glass of Chardonnay for a blonde woman in a cocktail dress, who had arrived 10 minutes after Naomi. They laughed, joked. He even recommended a dessert. Naomi sat still, her posture unchanged, but her eyes, they held the weight of decades. At a nearby table, a young couple, Jada and Marcus, shared a look. Something wasn't sitting right. Jada leaned over. "Why hasn't she been served yet?" she whispered. Marcus shrugged, watching Trent wipe down another table without so much as a glance toward Naomi's direction. Back near the bar, a man in a navy blazer swirled a glass of sparkling water. He hadn't said a word, but his eyes? His eyes hadn't left Naomi's table since the moment she sat down. Trent passed by once more, this time with a tray of food for another guest. As he breezed past, he tossed a line in Naomi's direction like crumbs to a pigeon. "Still deciding, ma'am." His voice had no warmth, no patience, as if the delay was her fault for being too slow, too quiet, or too present. Naomi looked up from her menu, her expression soft but steady. "I'm ready to order whenever you have a moment," she replied. Her voice was velvet wrapped around steel, and for the first time Trent paused, just for a second, but it was long enough to show that something in her tone had landed. He muttered something inaudible and turned away again. Across the room, the man in the navy blazer set down his drink. His jaw clenched. His fingers tapped the table once, then twice before stopping. He didn't move yet, but the shift had started. Naomi returned her gaze to the table, folding the menu gently. There was no anger in her eyes, no frustration, only a deep, familiar calm. She had been here before, not in this exact place, but in this feeling. Overlooked, disregarded, written off before a word had been spoken, and yet she sat in the center of it like a woman who had already won 1,000 silent wars. Around her, the restaurant buzzed. Service flowed like clockwork for everyone else, and Naomi. She waited. Her stillness became louder than the room itself. At table 14, Jada leaned forward again. "Why does she look like she's seen all this before?" Marcus answered quietly. "Maybe because she has." Back at the bar, Caleb Sinclair, owner of Sinclair's Place, watched his mother's hands resting gently on the table. The same hands that once worked 3 jobs to raise him. The same hands that built the very values this restaurant was founded on. And right now, those hands were being ignored. He didn't speak, not yet, because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be told, it only needs to be revealed. Naomi's table remained untouched. Not a drop of water, not a word of kindness. Meanwhile, across the room, a woman in sequins was already swirling her second glass of wine, smiling at jokes Trent delivered like sweetened poison. In a room full of attentive service, Naomi was a ghost. And Trent? He didn't just ignore her, he erased her. Comment 1 if this moment made your blood run cold, and you're ready to see how far this silence will go. The room pulsed with quiet luxury. Conversations fluttered beneath the piano's whisper. Glasses clinked with laughter and deals. Forks danced across plates without sound. To any outsider, Sinclair's Place looked perfect. But to those paying attention, something was rotting beneath the polish. Naomi sat alone near the kitchen. No candles lit, no server nearby. The energy around her was different, stagnant, heavy. Nearby, Jada stirred in her seat. She glanced toward Naomi's table, then at her own, where bread and dipping oil had arrived seconds after they sat down. "I think she was here before us," she murmured. Marcus looked over, eyes narrowing. "She was. That table's been still the whole time." At the far end of the restaurant, Caleb Sinclair sipped his sparkling water and watched. Not just Naomi, but every tick of behavior around her. The silence wasn't accidental. It was curated. Trent, mid to late 20s, tall and sharp-featured, moved with the careless confidence of someone used to being the center of the room. But never the story. He wore his uniform like armor and his smirk like a badge. His charm, though, was selective. He laughed easily with young guests, flirted politely with the older ones who tipped well, and cracked jokes that made people feel seen, so long as they looked like him. But when he passed Naomi's table, his energy changed. His eyes glazed. His smile died. To him, she didn't need attention. She didn't demand anything. And so, in Trent's world, she didn't exist. A table of 2 young men got extra napkins before they even asked. A family of 5 was greeted with complimentary appetizers. Naomi, nothing. And the worst part? Trent thought no one noticed, but Caleb did. Naomi shifted slightly in her seat, not out of discomfort, but memory. She'd seen this before, in bus stations, department stores, classrooms. The performance was always the same. Slow service, fake smiles, then blame placed gently back on her lap. "You should have said something. You looked like you were fine." "We were just busy." Trent passed by her table again. She raised her hand politely. He stopped, half a step past her, and turned with an edge in his voice. "Yes," Naomi smiled softly. "Would you mind bringing me some water when you get a chance?" Trent exhaled, loud enough for her to hear. "Sure thing," he said, already turning away. A few tables over, Gwen Rivera, the manager, caught the exchange. Her eyes narrowed. Back near the bar, Caleb gave the faintest nod. It was time to see who Trent really was. The tension in the room began to spread like smoke, silent but suffocating. More guests noticed the disparity. A mother looked from Naomi's empty table to her own, where drinks sat sweating in frosted glasses. Jada leaned in again. "This is uncomfortable," Marcus nodded. "It's worse because no one's saying anything." Gwen stepped back into the service corridor, glancing at the clipboard in her hand, but clearly thinking deeper. She'd worked under Caleb for years. She knew his values, knew Naomi's name the moment it appeared on the reservation list. But this? This was a test, and Caleb had already made his move. She whispered into the staff comms. "No one touches table 7 except Trent. Let's see how he handles it." Back on the floor, Naomi still waited. No one had yet realized. She wasn't the one being tested. Trent was. Naomi finally picked up her menu again, not to read it, but to occupy her hands. Her fingertips grazed the edges, soft and worn like pages of a well-read prayer book. Just then, Trent returned, holding a tray meant for another table. He stopped briefly near Naomi's side, eyes not meeting hers. "You still deciding?" he asked. The way he said it made it sound like an accusation, like her hunger was an inconvenience. Naomi looked up, her tone gentle but firm. "I've been ready for a while now." For a beat, Trent's facade cracked, a flicker of confusion in his brow, a stumble in his breath. But before he could say anything, another voice cut in. "Excuse me," said Gwen from across the floor. Her voice wasn't loud, but it landed with weight. "Trent, you forgot table 12's drink order." Trent turned sharply, annoyed, but the shift had begun. Back at the bar, Caleb's fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the wood. He'd seen enough. Naomi didn't need to complain. Her silence was louder than outrage. Every eye in the room was starting to turn. Trent was flustered now, his rhythm broken. He dropped off a check too soon, forgot to refill someone's bread. His jokes fell flat. Naomi remained a still point in the swirling motion. She didn't need water to make waves. Her presence alone disrupted the air. Jada whispered, "I think that's his boss's mom." Marcus blinked. "What?" She nodded. "Look at how the manager's watching, and that guy at the bar, he hasn't taken his eyes off her." Back in the shadows of the restaurant, Caleb stood up. He adjusted the cuffs of his navy blazer and exhaled slowly. Every table had someone eating, laughing, toasting. Except one. And in that moment, Trent made the mistake of laughing too loudly with another table, one Naomi could hear clearly. Caleb began walking, not quickly, not angrily, but with the kind of calm that made rooms go quiet before the storm. It wasn't just Naomi who was being watched. It was Trent. Every misstep, every delayed word, every flicker of arrogance. And the ones watching, they weren't angry, they were preparing. Comment 1 if you feel the pressure building and you know someone's about to get exposed. Sinclair's place had grown quieter, not silent, but still. The kind of stillness that settles over a room right before lightning strikes. The pianist hesitated between songs. Conversations slowed. Somewhere in the kitchen, the clatter of pans seemed distant, like it belonged to another place entirely. Table 7 remained untouched. Naomi sat in that dim corner like a figure in a painting. Regal, still, too proud to shrink, too wise to react. From the bar, Caleb Sinclair didn't blink. The man who built this place from scratch, who had scrubbed dishes before he owned kitchens, watched his mother be dismissed in the very restaurant her sacrifices had made possible. He wasn't just tracking service, he was tracking legacy. And Trent was erasing it, one smirk at a time. Gwen Rivera had seen a lot in her 10 years of managing front of house. Difficult guests, lazy servers, PR nightmares, but nothing quite like this moment. She stood by the espresso counter, clipboard in hand, watching like a hawk with lipstick. Her staff respected her, partly out of fear, partly out of awe. She was sharp, exacting, and fiercely loyal to Caleb, and tonight, Caleb had given her one clear directive. Watch table 7. Don't intervene. That wasn't easy. Gwen believed in course correction, quiet, efficient, internal. But this wasn't a correction. This was an unraveling. She could feel it. Trent, once smooth, now stumbled over small tasks. He'd forgotten 2 drink orders, dropped a roll. He was cracking, and Gwen knew the worst thing you could give a man like Trent was space to expose himself. So she waited and watched. Trent strolled past table 7 again. No tray, no eye contact. Just a stiff shrug of movement like Naomi was invisible. But Naomi raised her hand. A simple gesture. He stopped. Not out of courtesy, out of necessity. Yes? He asked, clipped. I'd like to place my order, Naomi said, tone velvet smooth. If you're not too busy, she added, soft but piercing. Trent's jaw clenched. His eyes darted around the room, searching for a distraction. An exit. I'll be back in a minute, he muttered, then spun on his heel without waiting for confirmation. But this time, people noticed. 3 tables near Naomi's turned. The young couple, Jada and Marcus, leaned in closer, lips parted in disbelief. Did he just walk away again? Jada whispered. Marcus's voice was lower. He's pushing it too far. But Gwen didn't move. And Caleb? He stood. Caleb walked with intention. Every step silent but loaded. The floor didn't creak, but the air did. Guests sensed it. Some paused mid-bite, others looked up from menus. Even the bartender slowed his polish. Caleb didn't storm. He never needed to. Power carried its own volume. He crossed the dining room until he stood just behind Trent, who was laughing with a table of college kids near the window. The smile on Trent's face fell the moment he saw him. Mr. Sinclair, I didn't know you were dining with us tonight, he started. Caleb's voice cut clean through the room. Calm. Cold. I've been here. Trent blinked. Of course, I would have said hello. I wasn't looking for a greeting, Caleb said. I was watching. And with those words, every other sound seemed to vanish. Caleb gestured with his chin toward Naomi's table. You see that woman? Trent followed the line of sight, still unsure. That's my mother, Caleb said, voice tightening like a rope pulled taut. Trent paled. Your mother? Caleb nodded once. The woman you ignored, the woman who's been sitting for over 30 minutes without a glass of water, the woman whose dignity you've chipped away at with every pass. Trent opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I watched you charm strangers, Caleb continued, serve tables that came after hers, smirk like her presence didn't matter. His voice remained low, but every word hit like a hammer. The entire restaurant had stopped pretending not to listen. Even the pianist had frozen, fingers hovering just above the keys. Gwen stepped forward, unsure whether to intervene. But Caleb raised one hand. He turned fully toward Trent. There is no excuse, he said flatly. Not one I'll accept. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. He looked to Gwen. Take over table 7. Make sure my mother gets everything she needs. Gwen nodded immediately and moved into action, her voice now warm and apologetic as she approached Naomi, who simply smiled and nodded with quiet grace. Back to Trent, Caleb's tone iced over. We'll discuss your future here later. For now, go home. Trent didn't move. Caleb stepped closer. That wasn't a suggestion. Trent finally untied his apron, folded it once, and walked out. The heavy door shut behind him with a finality that echoed long after he was gone. Caleb exhaled once, then walked to Naomi's table, crouching beside her chair. You okay, Mom? He asked gently. Naomi placed a hand over his. I'm fine, son. You handled that well. I should have stepped in sooner. She shook her head. Number you let him show who he is. That's more powerful. Around them, conversations picked back up, but they were quieter now, softer, thoughtful. People weren't just dining anymore, they were remembering. And Caleb? He wasn't just a restaurant owner anymore, he was a son, one who had just reminded the room, and himself, what dignity truly looked like. The man standing beside Trent wasn't just a boss, he was a son raised by the very woman this waiter had just disrespected in front of an entire room. And when Caleb Sinclair spoke next, he wasn't defending a table, he was defending her name. Comment 1 if this confrontation gave you chills, and you know someone's about to get what they deserve. The restaurant had gone still, not quiet, still, like the air itself didn't dare move. The pianist had stopped mid-note, fingers frozen above the ivory keys. Waiters paused mid-pour, guests mid-bite. Forks hovered, glasses hung in the air, and eyes, everywhere, were fixed on one place. Table 7, Naomi Sinclair sat as she always had, composed, shoulders square, hands gently folded atop her lap. But now every eye in the room saw her clearly, not as someone they'd overlooked, but as someone whose dignity had just been shattered in plain sight. And now, the man who built the very floor beneath their feet was standing. Not with rage, not with noise, with purpose. Caleb Sinclair, in his navy blazer and polished shoes, looked every bit the successful restaurateur. But his power didn't come from his wardrobe. It came from his presence. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. People listened because he spoke like a man who knew where he came from and hadn't forgotten who brought him there. He had built Sinclair's place on values passed down by the very woman now sitting alone at that table: respect, humility, perseverance. And now he stood, tall, still, deadly calm, beside a young server who had violated every single one of those values. To the guests, he was the owner. To Gwen, he was a leader. To Trent, he was a reckoning. And to Naomi, he was her son. "You've been here all night?" Trent asked, voice cracking. Caleb didn't answer the question. Instead, he turned to the room, slowly, letting them see his face, letting them feel the silence he'd just walked into. Then he turned back to Trent. "I've been watching." He didn't raise his voice, but each word fell like iron. Trent swallowed, trying to speak, trying to salvage control. "I didn't realize, if I had known—" "That's the point," Caleb cut in. "You didn't know who she was, so you decided she didn't matter." He turned his head slightly toward Naomi's table, not looking directly at her yet. "You treated my mother like an afterthought, like a burden." And then finally he looked at her. "She's the reason this place exists." Caleb stepped forward, narrowing the space between him and Trent. The air between them was thin. "You smiled for everyone else," he said. "You joked, you served, you catered." He paused. "But you saw her and chose nothing." Trent fumbled. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't have to mean it, you just had to do it." Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some stared at their napkins. Others looked straight at Naomi, shame on their faces though they hadn't said a word all evening. Across the floor, Gwen held her clipboard close to her chest. She didn't move. Caleb had the room now, and he wasn't done. "My mother raised me to believe in dignity," he said. "She worked double shifts so I could cook, studied menus with me when I couldn't afford culinary school, and stood in lines no one wanted to wait in, so I could one day open this place." Caleb pointed gently, just once, at table 7. "And tonight she was made to feel small in a room she helped build." Trent's eyes dropped. His shoulders slumped. He no longer tried to explain. Caleb didn't wait for an apology. "There is no coming back from what you did. Not here," he said. "I don't run this place on image. I run it on integrity." He looked to Gwen now. "Take over that table, right now, and make sure my mother gets every bit of the grace she was denied." Gwen didn't hesitate. As she rushed across the room, several guests followed her with their eyes, some with guilt, others with quiet awe. Then Caleb turned back to Trent. "You're done for the day. Leave your apron. Go home." Trent stood frozen. A boy, not a man, unarmed by exposure. For a moment he looked as if he might protest, might plead. But the weight of the silence crushed whatever pride he had left. He untied his apron, folded it once, and walked out. The door to the restaurant shut behind him with a muffled thud that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Inside, Gwen had already reached Naomi's table. She bent low, her voice soft, reverent. "Miss Sinclair, I'm so sorry for everything. Please allow me to serve you tonight." "It would be an honor." Naomi offered a gentle smile. "Thank you, dear. That would be lovely." She didn't need anger. Her grace had already said enough. Caleb approached Naomi's table with slower steps this time. Not to defend, not to explain, just to be her son. He crouched beside her chair, placing a hand over hers. "You okay, Mama?" Naomi's eyes met his. "I'm fine, baby. You did what you had to do." He exhaled. "I should have said something earlier." She shook her head. "Number you, let him show the world who he is. That's more powerful than anything you could have said." Around them, the room began to move again. The pianist resumed. Waiters carried trays. Conversations picked up, but softer now. Kinder. Because Sinclair's place had just remembered who it was built to serve. The meal hadn't been served yet, but something else had. A reckoning. And as Naomi Sinclair sat quietly, the rest of the restaurant couldn't stop watching her. Not with pity, not with curiosity, with respect. Comment one if this moment made you pause, because sometimes silence speaks louder than outrage. The atmosphere in Sinclair's place had shifted, not broken, but sobered. The grand piano resumed with slower melodies tinged with blues, soft and contemplative. People whispered, not because they wanted gossip, but because they'd witnessed something they weren't sure how to process. Gwen moved swiftly between the kitchen and table 7, personally taking Naomi's order and pouring her a tall glass of chilled lemon water. The kind of gesture that shouldn't have been special, but now carried the weight of apology. At other tables, guests glanced at Naomi with a new sense of awareness. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded attention. She had sat with grace while the room betrayed her, and somehow, that had made her unforgettable. Jada and Marcus sat at their corner table, untouched drinks in front of them, no longer able to eat. They weren't part of the problem, but they hadn't been part of the solution either. Jada twisted her napkin, eyes on Naomi. "She never even flinched," she murmured. Marcus nodded. "It's like she's been through this before." "She probably has," Jada said quietly. "That's what's killing me." They weren't the only ones rethinking everything. At a nearby table, a woman in her 60s dabbed her eyes discreetly. A younger man leaned closer to his date, speaking in hushed tones about his own mother. The incident hadn't just exposed Trent. It had exposed the silence of everyone who had watched and said nothing. Gwen approached Naomi's table once more, delivering her entree with elegant care. She placed a linen napkin beside the plate and knelt slightly, lowering her voice. "Ms. Sinclair, if there's anything else, anything at all you need tonight, I'm here." Naomi looked up, her voice as soft as silk. "Thank you, dear, but I'm well." She meant it, but Gwen still felt the weight of what had happened, of what she hadn't stopped. Across the room, a younger server nervously approached Gwen. "Should I say something to her?" she whispered. Gwen shook her head gently. "Just serve with respect. That'll speak louder now." But the conflict had already spread. It wasn't about Trent anymore. It was about how easy it had been to dismiss someone until her title, or her son, changed the room. It was about what it meant to really see someone. As Naomi cut slowly into her meal, a woman from a nearby table rose from her seat. She approached hesitantly, her voice tentative. "Ms. Sinclair?" Naomi looked up, composed as ever. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened. I saw it. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't say anything." Naomi studied the woman for a long second, not judging, just measuring truth. "You see it now," she replied gently. "That's the first step. The next one is using your voice." The woman nodded, eyes glistening. Thank you. She returned to her table, but the ripple continued. Another man offered a nod across the room. A table clapped quietly, not for show, but for the dignity that had refused to bend. Naomi had said almost nothing all night, and yet she had changed the entire room. Caleb returned to his seat at the bar, his blazer now draped over the backrest, sleeves rolled. The weight of the evening hadn't left his shoulders, but something softer had replaced it. Resolve. The bartender, who had been quiet all night, finally spoke. That your mother? Caleb nodded once. That's her. She's something, the man said, almost reverently. Caleb smiled faintly. She always has been. The quiet swirl of glass on wood, ice melting, then. The youngest server in the room walked to Naomi's table and gently placed a folded note beside her. It read simply, Thank you for reminding me who I want to be in this job. Naomi didn't smile outwardly, but inside something settled. Back at table 7, Gwen brought out dessert without being asked. A warm peach cobbler with cinnamon cream, plated like a tribute. Naomi looked at it, then at Gwen. I didn't order this, she said gently. No, ma'am, Gwen replied. You earned it. They shared a quiet smile. Jada and Marcus, still watching, finally reached for their silverware again. She changed the whole energy in here, Marcus said. Jada nodded. And she didn't say more than a few sentences all night. That's power, Marcus said. At other tables, people had returned to their meals, but not to their indifference. Sinclair's place had not only witnessed a reckoning, it had absorbed it. Naomi placed her napkin gently on the table, finished her last sip of water. No rush, no tension. The staff moved differently now, lighter but more deliberate. Caleb stepped to her side as she stood. Ready to go, Mom? She took his arm. Let's walk slow, she said. Let them remember the way we leave. And they did. From the table that had once been ignored, now walked the woman no one could forget. She could have been angry. She could have demanded more than an apology, more than silence turned into respect. But Naomi Sinclair didn't choose vengeance. She chose something far harder, grace. Comment 1. If you believe sometimes the strongest response is the softest one. The restaurant had begun to exhale. After the confrontation, after the silence, after the stares, Sinclair's place slowly came back to life, but changed. The clinking of silverware resumed, the piano settled into something tender and nostalgic, and voices returned in hushed tones. In the golden lamplight of table 7, Naomi took one final sip from her glass. Her meal was finished, dessert half eaten. Her presence, however, lingered in the air like perfume after the wearer has left. Caleb sat beside her now, no longer the boss, but the boy who used to stir cornbread batter at her elbow. Their plates were cleared, but the real conversation hadn't happened yet. Now that the restaurant had seen her, it was time for her son to see her fully, too. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on the edge of the table, his hands folded tightly, as if bracing for a truth he already knew. Naomi glanced at him sideways, reading him like she had when he was 5 and trying to hide a broken vase. You've got something pressing on you, she said softly. Caleb chuckled faintly. I should have said something sooner, Mama. She tilted her head. Why do you think you didn't? He paused. I thought I'd give Trent space to fix it, or maybe I wanted everyone else to see it for themselves. Naomi nodded. And? Caleb looked down. It still doesn't feel like enough. Naomi's gaze was steady. That's the burden of conscience, but the question is, did you act with integrity when it counted? Caleb hesitated. I built this place in your name, he said. Every plate, every table, every staff member. It's supposed to be a space of dignity. And yet tonight, he continued, voice low, I let you sit there for almost 40 minutes. Alone, ignored, watching people laugh around you like you were invisible. Naomi listened without interrupting. It doesn't sit right with me, he added. I know you told me I handled it well, but it doesn't feel like I did. Naomi finally turned to face him fully. Baby, she said gently, you didn't let me suffer. You let the truth surface. Her voice was calm, but strong. There's a difference between allowing harm and allowing clarity. Naomi leaned back in her chair, eyes distant now, not in sadness, but in memory. You know, she began, when I was your age, I worked as a server at a hotel downtown. I wore a name tag that said N. Sinclair, but most guests called me Girl. Caleb's jaw tightened. There were nights I was tipped with scripture verses instead of dollars, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. And I'd walk home in shoes that bled my feet just to keep your lights on. Caleb lowered his head, ashamed. But I didn't complain, she added. I watched, I waited, and when people showed me who they were, I believed them. She met his eyes. Tonight reminded me of those days, but it also reminded me how far we've come. You built this place, she said, not just with money, but with the lessons I gave you. And tonight, you used them. Caleb's eyes glossed with emotion. But I wanted to protect you, he said. You're not supposed to go through that, not here, not in my place. Naomi smiled. You did protect me, she said. You let him fall on his own. You didn't humiliate him. You exposed the rot. She paused, voice softening. And more than that, you let people see me, not as your mother, not as a customer, but as a woman who deserves respect. Just because. Caleb wiped his eyes subtly with the back of his hand. I didn't expect it to hurt this much, he admitted. That's how you know it mattered, Naomi whispered. They sat in silence for a moment, deep, mutual understanding settling between them. Naomi reached across the table, placing her hand over his. Son, she said, I didn't come here tonight to test you. I came here because I missed you. Caleb laughed through his nose, the sound wet but warm. Well, you definitely got my attention. Naomi chuckled. I always do. I just don't need to shout to do it. Gwen approached carefully from the side, eyes soft. Ms. Sinclair, we're closing soon. May I walk you to the door? Naomi smiled at her. No need, honey. My son's got me. She stood slow and steady as Caleb rose beside her. As they walked toward the front, the room hushed again, this time not from tension, but reverence. Some guests nodded, others placed hands over their hearts, quietly acknowledging what they'd witnessed. Gwen held the door open as the two stepped into the night air. The breeze was cool now, but Naomi didn't shiver. She stood tall, coat buttoned neatly, her hand looped into Caleb's arm. You did good, baby, she said. Caleb glanced at her. Still wish it hadn't happened. Naomi's eyes met the stars. What matters is how we answer life when it does. And with that, they walked toward the waiting car, leaving behind not just a restaurant, but a room full of people who would never forget what Grace looked like when it wore navy blue. She didn't slam the door. She didn't leave with thunder or fireworks. She left with quiet grace. And yet, every soul in that room knew something powerful had walked out. Comment 1 if this ending gave you goosebumps, because some exits say everything. Night had fully settled over Charleston. The lamps lining the streets outside Sinclair's place cast warm golden halos onto the sidewalk. Inside, the hum of closing time had begun. Tables cleared, chairs tucked, staff whispering their end-of-shift thoughts. But tonight felt different. No one rushed, no one joked. It was as if the air demanded reverence. Back near the front door, Gwen gathered the staff near the host stand. Her eyes scanned the room with the weight of someone who'd just watched their entire team walk through a lesson and survive it. She wasn't here to punish. She was here to recalibrate. Gwen Rivera stood straight, shoulders square, clipboard clutched against her chest. She looked at her team, servers, hosts, runners, people she'd trained, defended, and believed in. But tonight, belief wasn't enough. We need to talk, she said gently. They circled closer. You all saw what happened tonight, Gwen continued. Some of you served around it. Some of you stayed silent. I've been there too. Her voice didn't carry blame, but it carried weight. This place isn't just food and service, she said. It's memory, it's dignity, it's legacy, and if we forget that, we lose more than just a customer. A young host raised her hand. I didn't know who she was, she said, eyes cast downward. Gwen nodded. That's the point. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them like they matter. Another server, visibly shaken, stepped forward. I should have said something when I saw Trent ignore her. I didn't want to cause trouble. Gwen didn't scold. She simply asked, what kind of trouble is worse, speaking up or letting someone be erased? The team looked at each other. No one spoke for a moment, because the real confrontation wasn't with Trent anymore. It was with themselves. Caleb re-entered from outside, shoulders rolled back, eyes softer than they'd been all evening. His mother was safely in her car now. The door had closed, but something inside him remained open, wider than before. He saw the gathered team and nodded at Gwen to continue. I don't want anyone punished tonight, she said, but I want everyone changed. She looked to the youngest server. You wrote her that note, didn't you? The girl nodded slowly. I didn't know what to say out loud, but I had to say something. Gwen smiled. That's the beginning. Next time, say it loud enough for others to follow. Caleb stepped forward now, voice even. We don't lead with fear in this place. We lead with awareness, with courage. He looked around. And starting tomorrow, we rebuild that together. The team broke into quiet agreement, but something hung in the air still, unspoken. It came from Caleb himself. He turned toward table 7, the table his mother had sat at, and walked toward it slowly. The napkin she'd left was still folded neatly. Her water glass, empty. The seat she occupied, untouched. He stood there for a long moment, then pulled the chair out just slightly, not enough to disturb the setup, just enough to say, someone was here. He turned to Gwen. Leave that table as it is, he said softly. Gwen blinked. Sir? Caleb nodded. No one sits there. Not tomorrow, not the next day. That's hers. A pause. That table stays the way she left it. Gwen gave a single solemn nod. I'll make sure it's polished every night, she said, just the way she'd like it. The team slowly began to disperse, silent, thoughtful, changed. At the front door, Caleb paused once more and glanced over the restaurant he'd built, floor to ceiling, menu to memory. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't just see decor and profit margins. He saw people. He saw legacy. He saw his mother's fingerprints on every surface. She had never asked for credit, but tonight, she didn't need to. The room had spoken for her. Outside, Naomi sat in the passenger seat, her hand resting on her lap. The city lights blurred slightly in the car window beside her. She didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, almost to herself, she said, He handled it. From the driver's side, her niece, who'd come to pick her up, glanced at her. Everything okay, Auntie? Naomi smiled, slow and sure. Yes, she said. More than okay. Back inside Sinclair's place, the lights dimmed. The door clicked shut behind the last staff member. Only the moonlight now touched table 7, and in its quiet dignity, the room remembered her. Sometimes power doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't slam doors or demand revenge. Sometimes power just waits, sits still, and lets the world reveal itself. Naomi Sinclair didn't need a title or a spotlight to make an entire restaurant pause. All she had to do was sit in silence and wait for the truth to surface. To every woman who has ever been passed over, to every elder who has been spoken over, to every Black mother who taught strength through sacrifice, not noise, this story is for you. It's a reminder that your dignity is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you carry yourself through the storm. To those who watched tonight and saw a reflection of your past, whether it was behind a cash register, cleaning rooms, or being the last to be acknowledged in the boardroom, let Naomi remind you, you were never invisible. They just weren't ready to see you. And when the time came, you didn't scream, you stood. And that changed everything. So if this story stirred something in your spirit, comment 1 below. Let's honor the ones who kept walking even when the world looked the other way. Because we see you now, and we're not looking away.